Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Intuition Activation Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Rachel, a spiritual medium and intuitive coach, and I'm so excited that you're here and joining me for this intuitive development journey. Now, this week's episode is probably going to be somewhat of a controversial episode. So, if you saw the title, I said 7 health hacks to increase your intuitive abilities. So, what can be, so controversial about that? But these are sort of some health tips or things to possibly avoid that can actually increase your mental acuity, your mental clarity, which is going to allow you to be a clearer channel, a clear vessel, a clear portal for spirit to come through. Now, this information is a small part of a lecture that I teach in my signature 12-week program, the Intuitive Power Mastery class. And usually it kind of splits my students right down the middle. Either they really appreciate the information or they absolutely hate me for it. So, if health and wellness are not your thing, and especially because a lot of the time messages in the media around health and wellness are possibly centered around weight loss or your appearance, then I do want to reassure you that this is not the case. I'm not even advocating these things for your overall health. I am advocating these things because through my own experimentation, I have found that they have offered a lot more mental clarity and have really fine tuned my intuitive abilities. I find that when I don't avoid these things and I do sort of indulge in some of these things, I do notice a difference in my channeling abilities. And especially when you're starting out, if you're wanting to just sort of tweak your abilities, you're trying to kind of turn that volume dial up just a little bit more. I'm hoping that some of these health hacks can help you and might actually have a huge impact on your channeling abilities. So, again, I am not coming from a place of judgment with these things. They are simply things that I have experimented with and have found to be extremely helpful in increasing your mental acuity. Because honestly, if your mind is cloudy or foggy, or if you're feeling really tired all the time, you are definitely going to have a harder time channeling your guides or receiving intuitive downloads. You just don't have the capacity because your mind is just not at its best. So these things are here to help you, not to criticize or judge your health related habits. So love me or hate me for this episode, but as I said, this information has been so helpful for me and things that I have discovered through trial and error over the years, and I'm excited to share them with you. But before we do dive in, I do want to remind you that the May energy forecast is up and available, but on the podcast only. So if you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to head over to Apple or Spotify and subscribe to the Intuition Activation podcast so that you can hear the channeled divine, beautiful messages for the month of May. They're really powerful and they're definitely going to help you navigate the rest of this month. So I highly recommend going over to the podcast and checking that out. And finally, don't forget that at this point, at the point that this episode is coming out, I am on maternity leave. I've possibly already had my baby, which means that I am not available for intuitive spiritual guidance sessions until mid-July, kind of end of August at this point. And so if you would like to have a spiritual guidance session in the meantime, you don't want to wait till I come back. I do want to remind you that my beautiful team member, Indra Kelly, is still available. And the coupon code Indra, all caps INDRA, is still up and running for just another week or two, where you can get 15% off your session with her. So don't miss out on this amazing discount and head over to my website at jessicarachel.co and book your spiritual guidance session with Indra. And don't forget that Indra is not only a beautiful channel, she can channel your spirit guides and your loved ones and offer all of the beautiful messages that you love to get when I channel for you, but she also is an amazingly talented, intuitive energy healer. And so you do get a little taste of that in a session with her as well. And you just walk away feeling so amazing. So I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Now, those are the only announcements I have for today. So let's dive into today's episode, the 7 health hacks you need to increase your intuitive abilities. Now, I do want to start off by saying that all of these things are absolutely optional. Whether you do them or not does not indicate whether or not you are able to have a connection with your spirit guides. Your intuition is your birthright. You always have access to it. These are things that through experimentation, you may find are going to enhance your intuitive abilities. So there is never any judgment on any of these things. And some of these things may be helpful for you and some of them may not. So I really recommend that you take all of these things as a suggestion or something to potentially experiment with and see how you feel. None of these are absolutes. Okay, so let's talk about the first one. And this one I have found to be a really big one for me, which is avoiding coffee or caffeine. A lot of people are going to hate me for this one. I know a lot of us love our coffee, and honestly, so do I. I actually really enjoy coffee, the flavor of it, the way I feel when I drink it. And unfortunately, since I have taken on this position as a spiritual medium full time, I have to completely refrain from caffeine altogether. So, whether that be coffee or green tea or black tea or anything else that contains caffeine, because I do find that it really, really affects my ability to channel. Now, I know that you're probably thinking, how is that possible? Because, usually when you drink a cup of coffee, you probably feel like your brain turns on in the morning. But remember that when we're channeling, the goal is always to get grounded, to get into your body, to get centered, to be calm. And coffee or caffeine has quite the opposite effect. So when you drink coffee, there is the potential for that jittery feeling. There's the potential for increased anxiety, for you to just sort of be a little bit out of your body, for you to be out of your mind. And you can't really, or more in your mind than you would be if you were sort of grounded and centered in the way that a meditation would affect you. So I want you to sort of think of caffeine as like the opposite of a meditation. And so if you're going to need to do whatever you can to get out of your head and into your body, coffee is going to be, or caffeine is going to be actively working against you and affecting your channeling abilities, affecting your ability to get out of your own thoughts, get out of your own way, and allow those intuitive downloads to come through. And then in addition to that, when there are new studies coming out all of the time about the effects that coffee have. And for some people, coffee has on the body. And while in some ways there are some benefits, a lot of people have discovered that coffee can contain a very high mold content. And so we talk a lot about, or at least, there's a lot of sort of information out there about sort of the gut brain connection. And that if your gut is not doing well, then your mental clarity and your mental acuity is also not doing well either. And so if you're consuming a lot of things that kind of have a higher mold content, it can result in sort of a foggier thought, a feeling of a foggy brain syndrome. I'm having pregnancy brain at the moment, and I'm feeling foggy as I'm trying to say this. But feeling kind of foggy in your mind, brain fog, that was the word I was looking for. And so something to consider that some people don't even realize that they are sensitive to the mold content that is found on coffee beans. And it just occurs naturally. This also occurs on things like peanuts. There are just certain kind of grains or plants that just have a higher mold content. And so for some people, it affects them more than others. And so, if coffee is one of those things, for you, you have to experiment with it and sort of see, if I drink coffee, how is my channeling practice after that? And this is what I tell my students. I tell them, I'm not telling you to cut coffee out cold turkey, especially for those of you, if it's not your full-time job as it is for me, you don't have to avoid it altogether. I do recommend experimenting with. If you try to channel before you've had your morning coffee, what is that experience like compared to after you've had it? Or if you know you're going to want to have a deep meditation that day, can you think about reducing the caffeine or reducing the number of cups of coffee that you are having prior to that channeling or meditation session? The other thing that some people do is either slowly wean themselves off or switch to decaf after a certain time in the day. And also think about that if how caffeine is affecting your sleep. If you are drinking coffee throughout the day and then you're discovering that perhaps you're not getting a really good quality sleep, maybe it's the coffee not wearing off as quickly as you think it should. So for in some people's body, the half-life of caffeine is much longer than it is for others. So some people know their own body and they kind of say, as long as I stop drinking it by 4 or by noon. I know for me, if I drink coffee, I it takes a full 12 hours for that caffeine to leave my body. And so I know I'm not going to be having a good sleep that night if I drink it any later than 10 a.m., for example. And so, you could be more sensitive. And so this is something to consider as well. Again, experiment with it, but I always recommend trying to do a channeling session or connecting with your guides when you are not caffeinated at all, and compare that to a time where maybe you have had a coffee that day and really see the difference. I know for me, it's a massive difference. So, yeah, give that a try. Now, the next one, and I feel like every time I'm about to share the next number, I'm like, someone's going to be really angry at me for sharing this, because these are things that a lot of us tend to enjoy indulging in. And again, I'm not telling you that you can never indulge in them. I'm just saying experiment with using them or not using them as a means of increasing your mental acuity and your clarity. So the next one, number 2 of something to experiment with avoiding is alcohol. Now, this one is a little bit trickier because, in some senses, one could argue that alcohol does have a sort of calming or soothing effect. I mean, there is something to be said about the fact that some hard liquors are called spirits. And in some ways, they relax you enough that you do get to have a somewhat spiritual experience, or that your inhibitions are lowered enough that you can relax enough to perhaps channel or receive some clarity and some insight. However, I would argue that it is a limiting experience, that you can only go so far, and there is always a tipping point to which the mental clarity completely declines in the opposite direction. So it's really hard to find the sweet spot of how much alcohol you would need to consume in order to be relaxed and channeling versus to be so relaxed that you don't remember or have your faculties to you or about you. And so I would say that through my own experience, I actually do not drink alcohol at all. Again, because this is my job and I do need to have the most heightened mental acuity as possible. And for other people who this is not your job, but you're just wanting to tweak your mental acuity, try experimenting with, what if I don't drink alcohol the night before and then channeling the next morning, right? Try to space it out that it's not on the same day, because it can make a difference. That also being said, if we do think about sort of the effects that alcohol have on the body, these things can affect our mental acuity over time. In the most direct sense, it definitely dehydrates you. And when you're dehydrated, you're not thinking clearly. Technically, it does act as a quote unquote poison in your body. Your organs do have to detox from consuming alcohol, and they do have to work hard to sort of remove the quote unquote toxins that come through when you do indulge or consume alcohol. And so again, now your body is working and focusing on detoxing and this can cause some brain fog. This can cause you to feel tired and not good and hard to think straight. I'm pretty sure that anybody who's had a hangover can argue that you're not thinking clearly, you're not thinking straight. You feel a little fuzzy in your head, post, alcohol consumption the next day. And so again, if we're focusing on mental clarity and acuity, you definitely are going to feel a difference when you consume alcohol versus when you don't. And also recall that with alcohol, sometimes it actually takes some people are surprised to realize that it can actually take a few days for the effects of it to leave your system. And it's not necessarily enough to just rehydrate yourself and be good to go the next day. It does have a taxing effect on your body. Your kidneys and your liver really definitely have to work hard to detoxify your body post alcohol consumption. And again, then the energy cannot go towards mental clarity and mental acuity. I will say that, I have this was something that I sort of discovered for myself very early on, that alcohol just never sat well with me. I actually stopped drinking alcohol well before I realized that that I was interested in developing my intuitive abilities simply because of how it made my body feel. I did not like the feeling. And so I avoided it simply for personal reasons. I did not like the sensation of having alcohol in my system. I didn't like how I felt for days afterwards. And I do have a very sensitive body in a lot of ways. And so I've always felt that alcohol never sat well with me, definitely affected my digestion going forward. And so then, I don't know that I'm necessarily a great authority to say that when I do consume alcohol, what the channeling experience is like, because I have never really been one to consume a lot of alcohol, or if any. And so, but I can say from talking to other friends, other mediums, other colleagues who have, who do indulge in the occasional glass of wine or, shot or whatever, they do find that it does significantly affect their channeling abilities post consumption. So, definitely something to consider when you're trying to increase your intuitive abilities. Again, experiment with it. What happens when I do have the glass of wine with dinner and try to channel the next day? And what happens when I don't? How do I feel? What is that channeling experience like? Um, yeah, so that's really alcohol for you. Let's dive into number 3, and again, I feel like each one, someone's gonna be really upset with me. Number 3 is sugar, and by sugar, I don't mean the sugar that you find naturally occurring in fruits or, maple syrup or, naturally occurring in nature. I'm talking about processed white cane sugar. The stuff that they tell you to avoid for so many other reasons, health reasons in your life. And this one is, although maybe it might be fairly obvious that sugar is not great for you, it also can affect your mental clarity and mental acuity. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One being that, as we spoke about before, when we talk about sort of the gut brain connection, right? If your gut is not feeling healthy, it's not working at its best, then it is going to cause a bit of brain fog. You're not going to be thinking straight or clearly or as clearly as you'd like. And unfortunately, sugar is one of those things that can feed the candida or the yeast that lives in your gut. And everybody does have a healthy amount of candida in their digestive tract of, yeast. Um, but there is an opportunity that when we're feeding it, that we can cause candida overgrowth, right? So and candida feeds off sugar, so the more we feed it, the more it grows. And when candida sort of cells die, they do release a little bit of an off gas, and this can make you feel really foggy in your mind. This can really make you feel like you can't think straight, like something's off. You don't feel like yourself. You definitely can't think straight. It's a really big issue for brain fog. And so, if brain fog is a really big issue, take a look at your sugar consumption. Is this something that is really high in your diet? And perhaps maybe you have a bit of an overgrowth in your intestinal tract. And this could be a reason for it. This could be, the thing that, and if you're feeding it, it's continuing to grow. So, definitely something to consider. And then the sort of slightly more well-known effects of sugar, if we think about, take ingesting large amounts of sugar, and I'm talking about processed sugar, we do get that blood sugar increase, that blood sugar spike, followed by a pretty intense blood sugar crash a couple of hours later. And once again, if we're kind of going through this crash, up and down this roller coaster of your blood sugar spiking and then crashing all throughout the day, how is this going to affect your ability to think clearly, think straight, and allow yourself, energy, intuitive downloads to come through? Because when you're on that sugar high, again, similar to caffeine, it's sort of like an energy high, an energy boost, but you're not quite in your body in the same way that you would be if you had kind of an even keel, smooth energy. And then, of course, when you experience that blood sugar crash, you're not feeling good, right? You're feeling hungry, you're feeling angry, you're feeling tired, you're feeling foggy. And all of these things definitely counteract your ability to have a really clear picture or channeling experience. And so, again, I do want to say that. I'm not referring necessarily to sugar that occurs naturally in nature. Things that are combined with fiber, such as fruit, are not going to have that effect on you for sure, not in the same way. And so I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sugar that occurs naturally, right? I'm not. I definitely have a lot of fruit throughout the day. And I definitely will indulge once in a while in things with maple syrup and honey, etc. Maybe a little bit more sparingly, just because, again, those are not combined with fiber as much. But they definitely do not have the same effect on my channeling ability as sugar will. And so I personally do not, I actually avoid processed white sugar 100%. It is not in my diet. Again, because this is my job. If sugar is something that you like to indulge in once in a while, again, experiment with it. See how you feel on days when you don't have it compared to days when you do. With this one, I do want to argue that it does take a little bit of time for your body to kind of detox from sugar. And so if you are considering experimenting with this one, not having it for one day might not actually change your mental clarity or acuity at all. You would probably have to take it out of your diet for a good few weeks before you started to notice a difference. I would say 2 to 3 weeks before you actually felt that clarity. And again, because it might have something to do with the bacteria in your gut that are still remaining, even though you're not feeding them. And so you do need to not feed them for a few weeks and not give them any more fuel to continue to grow. And it's only once those sort of candida cells or yeast bacteria die off that you're going to finally start to feel some mental clarity again. So this one takes a little bit longer, and I highly recommend experimenting with it. I do also want to say that we do know that sugar is quite an addictive substance. And so in my experience of going off sugar, and unfortunately, this again had little less to do with my mental acuity in my original reasoning for getting rid of sugar. It was more for how it made me feel, and I felt that I didn't feel good when I had it. But what I did notice when I finally did, when I did completely cut it out after a few weeks, is that your taste buds actually change and you actually don't crave it anymore to the point where it doesn't taste good to you. It gets to a point where things that have sugar in it start to taste artificial and sometimes too sweet. And so now if I, accidentally eat something that has sugar, I'll almost immediately know because I can't stand the taste. It's like too sweet, right? Very different in comparison to the sweetness of something again that occurs naturally in nature, like in fruits or dates or honey or maple syrup. Things with sugar, they do have, with processed sugar, do have a bit more of a synthetic quality to them somehow, and you can taste the difference. So if you are willing to dive into that and give it a try, and you can stick it out for a few weeks, your taste buds change, and then you suddenly not only do you not crave it anymore, it's actually off-putting, which is a really interesting experience. And again, a number of my friends who have done the same thing have had a very similar experience that they too suddenly cannot stand the taste of it. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of just have to um, be consistent and hold, or persistent rather, and hold out. And then, eventually everything shifts and you don't crave it anymore. So it's one of those things that if you do go cold turkey, it might actually benefit you long term and then you won't ever want it again, which is sort of where I'm at. So that's kind of a nice thing to know, that there is a light at the end of the sugar-free tunnel. All right. The next thing, it's two things. Number four, and these two things are definitely very personal, and have been something that I have had to avoid my entire life due to sensitivities. Um, But again, through communicating with other people, and their own experiences, they have found that reducing them in their diet have also increased mental clarity and acuity. And these two things are gluten and dairy. Like I said, these ones are probably the most personal ones. Every body is different. And your body might digest gluten just fine, and your body might digest dairy just fine. And so, if this is the case for you, then ignore this number, this health hack, because it might not actually affect you. However, I'm going to argue a couple of things to these points. When we talk about gluten, for most people, gluten is not actually the issue. In North America, so Canada and the United States, there is a pesticide that is used on products that contain gluten, such as wheat, when they are grown in the fields, called glyphosate. And glyphosate is extremely damaging to the gut. It can cause leaky gut, it can cause food sensitivities, it can cause rashes, it can cause a whole bunch of other things. And this is well documented. And it is very hard to find wheat that is grown without being sprayed with glyphosate. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's pretty difficult to find. And so most people who feel that they have a gluten sensitivity, and then they go over to Europe, for example, where glyphosate is actually illegal and not allowed to be sprayed on the crops, they find that they have absolutely no problem indulging in things like breads and pastas. And so in that case, it wasn't really the gluten that was the problem in the first place. It was the pesticide, the glyphosate, that was affecting them. And so I do not know if I am celiac or if I actually have a gluten sensitivity or if it's a glyphosate sensitivity. All I know is that while living in North America, living here in Canada, unfortunately, any of those products are going to contain glyphosate either way, and the gluten is going to affect me and my gut health and therefore my brain health. If you find that after you eat something that has gluten in it, right? So, gluten being sort of those grains like wheat and barley, things like breads and pastas and pastries, those types of things, and you feel quite bloated afterwards, well, that's a pretty good indication that it's affecting your gut in some way, that it's affecting your digestion. And then again, it might not be an immediate reaction, but if you're experiencing long term feelings of fogginess, brain fog, cloudiness, not thinking clearly, not thinking straight, maybe, just maybe, it's the gluten or the glyphosate in the gluten based product. So definitely something to consider. Like I said, this one for me, I have known about as a food sensitivity for me since I was a very young child due to stomach issues. Once I did cut it out of my diet, I did feel a whole lot better. I stopped having nearly as many digestive tract issues as I had and have not been able to eat it since. So my last sort of indulgence in anything with gluten was when I was about 12 years old, and I haven't had any since. Again, because it made me feel quite ill. And so again, this is one of those ones that you kind of have to figure out for yourself. Like if you've taken out the other three, and you're still kind of having these brain foggy gut issue type things, maybe it's the gluten or the glyphosate for that matter. And there are ways around this for sure. Some people are indulging in, going to flour mills and kind of bringing their own like self-grown wheat grains or wheat kernels, or that they maybe purchase from the local farm and they know isn't sprayed in certain pesticides. Again, if you're willing to go through that effort, all power to you. Otherwise, for me, the easiest thing is to just avoid it at all costs. um, and know that I feel better as a result. So again, something to think about, something to consider. With dairy, this is again very personal. I know a lot of people love their dairy products. We love our cheese, we love our yogurt, we love our ice cream, and I'm not telling you that you have to take those things out of your diet, but I do want to argue that the majority of the population is lactose intolerant. Milk is another animal's milk, and humans were not meant to consume the milk of another mammal. Just like it would be weird to feed a cow human milk, in some cases, it's arguably weird to feed a human cow's milk. And a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but there are things in it that our bodies are not designed to digest. And for some people, that's the lactose, but there are other sort of components or chemical compounds in cow's milk that our bodies just really don't know how to digest. Things like casein as well. Um, and so, again, if you're wanting to increase your mental acuity and you're continuing to consume something that your body has to work really, really hard to digest, it's going to affect your overall energy. It's going to affect how you're feeling long term. If you're feeling particularly phlegmy, right? You have, a lot of postnasal drip, you're always congested. This is and even if you don't get an immediate stomach ache or indigestion post consuming dairy, there are other effects or other things that your body could be telling you that this isn't for you. So it could be, kind of being a little bit phlegmy. It could be eczema. Eczema is very directly linked to dairy consumption. So if you are having eczema as an issue or skin rash issues, cut out the dairy, see how you feel. And again, all of these things can relate to not feeling your optimal self. And so, if you do have sensitivities to either of these things and you are unaware of them and you do cut them out, the mental clarity that you experience post cutting them out it cannot be compared. It really makes a huge difference. And in addition to that, when you feel better, everything just improves. So, again, these are not things I'm saying everybody has to cut out. Some people don't have issues with these things. I know my husband has zero issue with either of them, and his mental clarity is just fine, whether he has them or he doesn't. And he has experimented with these things. And so, again, it might not be you, but if you are feeling like, you know what, I've tried everything else and I'm still feeling really foggy and tired and I'm not feeling like my best self, what happens when you cut these things out? How do you feel? Um, there is also something to be said about fermenting the dough for easier digestion. So those who are skilled enough to bake their own sourdough bread or can find a good bakery that makes sourdough bread, there's something to be said about the breakdown of the gluten being definitely easier to digest if it is fermented first. And not as full, because if we look at the sort of breads in the grocery store, some of them even have added gluten to make them feel more spongy, right? All of those things. So if you're making it yourself, it's always cleaner, it's always more wholesome. So again, something to tweak or experiment with. But not for everybody. All right, let's talk about number 5. Now, this is one that actually I have experimented with cutting out completely in my life, and I have also kind of had a slow return to it. And so this one, I'm a little unclear as to how much it affects your mental clarity, and I'm going to explain why. So this one is considering either a plant-based diet, so vegan type diet, and or eating only really clean meats without processing, without antibiotics, without being fed things like corn and wheat and things like that. And so I was plant-based for about 4 or 5 years prior to this pregnancy. And I was completely plant-based, and going off of meat and going plant-based, I actually felt compared to all of the other things that I mentioned before, because at that point, I had already taken those things out of my diet. So I'd been caffeine, sugar, alcohol, gluten, and dairy free for the majority of my life. So I couldn't tell you sort of how much that increased my mental acuity. These are just things that I really had to remove from my diet due to, gut issues and personal health reasons. So when I did decide to go plant-based about 4 or 5 years ago, this was when I experienced the most significant increase in my mental clarity and channeling abilities. And it was just around the time that I was going through my spiritual awakening. So I did feel the difference from the meditations I had had prior to going plant based to post going plant based, and they were quite significant. And now here's the thing that I'm unclear of, because since I have been pregnant, and I always claim to, I always really like to advocate for eating intuitively. If your body is craving something, chances are it's because it's needing a certain vitamin, nutrient, or mineral, and to always lean into that. And so, in this pregnancy, when I have craved things like meat or eggs, I will definitely find the most clean option, but I definitely will indulge in them without shame because obviously there's something that my body is needing that it's not getting in high enough quantity from perhaps the plants that I'm consuming in the moment. And so here's the thing that I kind of feel is that when you do go plant-based, it forces you to have a very wide variety of fiber in your diet, which in the long run really, really helps with gut health. And so I don't know if it was just that it overhauled my gut health and that is what caused sort of the mental clarity and acuity. The other thing that I'm thinking is that prior to going plant based, I wasn't necessarily being extremely cautious about the types of meats I was consuming. And so I wasn't necessarily being very careful as to make sure that they didn't have antibiotics. I also wasn't making sure about what the grains that those animals were being fed. And so, for somebody who has a very intense gluten sensitivity, I sometimes wonder if the animal had been fed grains and then I was consuming the animal, was I receiving sort of a secondhand gluten poisoning, so to speak, right? Because it was in the animal itself. And so I'm not sure if that's what the problem was, or if it's just that, eating plant-based forced me to eat a wider variety of fibrous foods. And so now I definitely am still in a place where the majority of my diet is plant based. But if I am going to indulge in eating meats or animal products, I do make sure that they are of the utmost top quality, that they are really clean, that there are absolutely no antibiotics. And I'm very careful about the grains that they are fed, if any. Um, Definitely lean towards grass fed over everything else. And so, this is one that I'm not sure, and I'm admitting this, I'm not sure what the reason is that it causes mental clarity and acuity or why it did so for me. But I also can say anecdotally through speaking to friends and other colleagues who do channel for a living, they too have felt that there's something to be said about having a majority of their diet be plant-based. And, through discussion, there are some spiritual aspects to it that we can consider, right? If we think about consuming the energy of the animal, especially considering the environment that they may have been raised in to produce the meat. If you eat pain, are you feeling pain? And so again, we can get a little bit woo-woo here. Is that part of it? I don't know. I'd like to argue that maybe and possibly there's something to be said. I know that I was raised Jewish, and there's something to be said about why they eat only kosher meat. Kosher meat doesn't mean the meat was blessed by a rabbi. It means that it was killed with the least amount of pain and suffering possible, because there is this understanding that if you eat pain, you feel pain. And so when we're talking about sort of overall health and wellness, mental acuity and clarity, you know, is there something to be said about the energetics of eating meat, animal-based products when they're not treated well? So I don't know. Something to consider. Again, I go back and forth on this one. As of this moment, being 39 and a half weeks pregnant, I definitely am having things like bone broths that I'm creating out of very organic and well-fed chickens, that kind of a thing. Um, and I will indulge everyone. I will have them if my body is craving them, and I won't deprive my body in any way. And still finding that my mental clarity is just fine. So I don't know what it is, but definitely 4 or 5 years ago when I made that shift to a plant-based diet, I definitely felt a huge difference in my mental clarity. So again, something to experiment and something to consider. So now let's move on to number 6 and 7 are not about things that you put in your mouth. They're not about foods that you eat, but definitely things that I find are going to have a huge impact on your mental clarity and your body's functioning and processing overall. And so number 6 is natural household and personal care products. I am a huge advocate for this, that there are so many chemicals that are harmful to the human body in household cleaning products and personal care products, that you could argue that, a woman who puts on all of her skincare and then makeup and everything is possibly putting on thousands of chemicals, unnatural chemicals onto her body before she's even started her day. And, a lot of these things that are put in these products that are, if they're not natural, they're endocrine disruptors. In other words, they disrupt your hormones and your hormones functioning. And again, if your hormones aren't working well, then nothing's working well and you're not feeling good. So I definitely am an advocate for cleaning my house with vinegar and water and essential oils. That's really all. You'll see spray bottles around my house, and that's all that's in them: vinegar, water, sometimes rubbing alcohol if I need it to be particularly strong, sometimes baking soda if I need a good scrubber. But again, natural materials, and I'll add some peppermint oil to make it smell a little less vinegary. And that's all I'm really using to clean my house, because even just inhaling some of those chemical based products, again, think about how that's affecting your ability to think straight if you're constantly inhaling these neurotoxins. And a lot of these chemicals, especially with the fragrances, do have a lot of neurotoxins. And that brings me to any personal care product or household product that has the word fragrance in it. So, fragrance is not regulated in the sort of consumer product world, in the sense that there can be up at thousands and thousands of chemicals that can be categorized under the word fragrance. So, if an ingredient on a product says fragrance, that doesn't mean that it's one fragrance that's being put in there. It can be upwards of hundreds of different chemicals that are considered a company secret or company formula to create their particular scent. And so it can be hundreds of different chemicals combined together to make that word fragrance. And so it umbrellas or hides a whole bunch of chemicals that are being placed in the product. And unfortunately, they don't have to divulge that information to us. The companies do not have to share what components are making up that fragrance. But I can argue that the majority of these products that are being combined to create the fragrance are harmful to the human body, are definitely endocrine disruptors, are going to affect your hormones and your overall health in some way. And more importantly, they're really going to bog down your detoxification system, and again, your mental clarity and your mental acuity. So, highly advocate for swapping out, things like your deodorants and your makeup products and your household products for things that are much more natural. There's a lot of really great products out there that are really not that expensive. I've definitely experimented with making my own as well, making my own deodorant and things like that, or even just buying fragrance free is a really good step in the right direction. So something to consider. Are you overloading your body with toxins? In which case, is it affecting its ability to function optimally? And in turn, is this affecting your mental clarity in some way? Now, the last one is, I would say, probably not so controversial, but maybe a little less well known, which is that things such as EMFs, so electromagnetic fields, Bluetooth and Wi Fi, and radiation being emitted from your technology based devices are affecting your body's ability to regulate itself, to ground itself. There's a reason that all of these biohacking companies are creating things like grounding mats, or telling you need to ground and put your feet on the earth, and experience negative ions, through the bottoms of your feet, because it is affecting you, and it is affecting your ability to get centered, to get grounded, to be connected to the earth in some way, which again is going to affect your channeling abilities. So there are just a couple of tips of things that I really practice that, again, these are ones that I don't know if you're going to feel an immediate difference. I just think they're good practice. And hopefully that, you know, over time you will start to feel a difference. And so the big one for me, I would say, is when your phone is on, If the Bluetooth is on, you are radiating yourself. There are enough studies out there to show that Bluetooth is actually extremely harmful to human health, extremely harmful to brainwaves. And so, if you are going to have your phone on your person, in your pocket, near your body, even in your purse, I would argue, you should definitely have the Bluetooth function off if you're not using it because it is frying your body. It is definitely not doing you any good. So, my husband and I have a rule that Bluetooth is never on, and we do not buy Bluetooth based products. So, we don't use AirPods. Especially think about the Bluetooth then being like sent into your head. That definitely can't be helpful for your mental acuity. So definitely be cognizant of that. We try to avoid Bluetooth at all costs. That being said, Wi-Fi can also be disrupting your body's common and natural functions. So in our household, we shut the Wi-Fi off at night. I can't say that we can avoid Wi-Fi altogether. There are some extremists who will literally continue to use dial-up internet just to or a cable, an Ethernet cable into their laptops to avoid having any Wi-Fi in their homes. I would say that that is a little bit extreme and not always feasible, but at the very least, you can give your body a break and shut the Wi-Fi off when you're not using it so that you're not constantly being bombarded with the signals coming from your Wi-Fi modem. If your Wi-Fi modem is anywhere near your bedroom, please move it. Do not have it where you're sleeping. It's affecting your sleep, guaranteed. And then again, you can shut it off and turn it back on in the morning. That's also an option. One rule that my husband and I also have, and we keep this very strongly, is that if your phone is going to be near you, so anywhere near your body, it has to be on airplane mode. Airplane mode shuts off its ability to search for Wi Fi and Bluetooth signals, and that again is radiating your body. It's affecting your cells, affecting your overall health in some way. So some people get really annoyed with me because they feel like they can't contact me if I'm out because if I have my phone in my purse or in my pocket, it's on airplane mode and you can't call me. So I can only be connected to my phone when I have it turned on and it's off my person. And I will not have my phone on my body or in my pocket unless it is on airplane mode. So again, I'm a little bit strict with this again because this is my job, and I'm very much a bit of a health and wellness junkie, I guess you would say, or somebody who really advocates for things that are going to optimize your overall health and wellness. But definitely these are things that can affect your mental clarity over time and your sleep over time. And if your sleep is not doing well, consider the Wi-Fi in your home. Consider, people say you shouldn't sleep with your phone next to your bed simply because of the habit of not scrolling before you go to sleep. But I would also argue because you don't want the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth radiating your skull as you're sleeping. It's definitely not going to help with your sleep or your mental clarity and your mental acuity. So I'm going to get off my soapbox about that one. But those are the 7 things that I would ask you to consider when trying to turn up the volume of your intuition and your intuitive abilities. But I do want to remind you, as I said, that all of these things are completely optional. They are completely up for experimentation. Remember that your intuition is your birthright. It is something that is always there and never goes away. All of these things that I have mentioned are simply there to help you turn up the volume or to tweak it a little bit to see if it helps increase your mental acuity and your ability to connect with your guides. So I'm definitely curious to hear which one you are willing to try and experiment with it and let me know what it feels like. You can always reach out to me on Instagram and share with me your experience with maybe trying to avoid some of these things and how that experience has been for you. And that's everything I have to share with you for this week. I'll catch you in next week's episode. Bye, guys.